One moment Kang Ji Won was seated at the head of a long table, 12 of Seoul's most dangerous men hanging on his every word. The next, the door of his private dining room flew open, and every hand in the room moved at once, toward jackets, toward waistbands. Ji Won raised one hand. Everything stopped. He looked at the door. Standing in the doorway, chest heaving, knees scraped raw, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her shoes were on the wrong feet. There was a cut above her left eyebrow that was still bleeding. She stood there in the middle of the most dangerous room in Seoul, eyes scanning from face to face with a focus that had no business existing in someone that small, until her eyes found the one man who hadn't moved. She ran directly to Kang Ji Won and stopped in front of him. She looked up, and in a voice that was somehow both terrified and completely certain, she said, "Please, sir, they are beating my mamma." Eyes already tearing up, voice breaking. Nobody breathed. 12 men who had collectively done things that would make ordinary people faint sat completely still, watching their boss. Ji Won looked at the child for 5 full seconds. Then he stood up. Ji Won didn't ask questions. He crouched down to the child's level, something none of the men in that room had ever seen him do for anyone. And he asked exactly one thing. "Where?" She pointed. He straightened up, gave 2 sharp instructions to the men nearest the door, and walked out. His second in command followed, visibly thrown, because Kang Ji Won did not personally leave his own meetings. Kang Ji Won sent people. He directed things from the center. He was the center. Tonight he walked out the door. They didn't have to go far. 2 blocks from the restaurant, on a quiet side street still warm with the last of the evening's light, they found her. Vanessa Blake was on the ground. But here is what you need to understand about Vanessa Blake before anything else. She was not lying there waiting to be rescued. When Ji Won arrived, she was already trying to push herself back up, one arm braced against the pavement, jaw set, a cut across her cheekbone, and her hair loose from where someone had grabbed it. She was hurt. She was badly hurt. But she was trying to get back up, because that was who Vanessa Blake was, and had always been, and would continue to be no matter what the world put in front of her. Ji Won crouched in front of her. He was unhurried. He assessed her in seconds. Then he made one phone call. His private doctor, not an ambulance. Vanessa registered this immediately. "I don't know you," she said. Her voice was strained, but it was not weak. "The hospital will ask questions," Ji Won said. "Questions neither of us want to answer tonight." She looked at him. Not the look of a woman who was frightened and grateful. The look of a woman who was calculating, measuring the situation, measuring him, making a decision with what she had available. Then she asked the only question that actually mattered to her. "Where is my daughter?" Ji Won glanced to his left. Tiana was standing 3 feet away, holding the hand of one of Ji Won's men with both of hers. Vanessa exhaled. One sharp breath. Then she looked back at Ji Won and gave him a single nod. On her terms, not his. "Now, before we go any further, you need to see what happened on this street 2 hours ago. You need to understand what Vanessa was doing before all of this. Because the attack that landed her on this pavement was not random. It was not a robbery. And the man who ordered it was not a stranger. 12 hours earlier, in a sleek private office in Busan, a man in an immaculate suit sat with a phone pressed to his ear. His name was David Lee, and if you passed him on the street you would think, lawyer, maybe, or the kind of businessman who gets photographed at charity galas and says the right things about community investment and giving back. He was handsome in that careful, constructed way. He smiled easily. He remembered everyone's name. he said into the phone, very quietly, very calmly. Find her. Bring her to me. Don't touch her. I want her scared, not hurt. He said it the way you'd give instructions about a misplaced package. Then he ended the call and straightened his cufflinks. Back in Seoul, Vanessa had been closing up for the night. Tiana was on her hip, sleepy, head heavy on her mother's shoulder. One small fist twisted into the fabric of Vanessa's jacket. The street outside the gallery was quiet. The sign above the door, hand-painted in Vanessa's own lettering, English and Korean side by side, caught the last of the evening light. She had built that sign herself. She had built all of it herself. 3 men came around the corner, not rushing, walking with the specific, deliberate energy of people who had been sent somewhere and knew exactly where they were going. Vanessa saw them before they saw her face. She put Tiana down behind her in one smooth movement. Looking around to know if help was nearby, it wasn't. She fought. This needs to be said clearly. Vanessa Blake fought. She was not passive, she was not helpless, and she was fierce. But there were 3 of them, and they were sent by a man with money and patience and 4 years of obsession behind him, and eventually 2 of them overwhelmed her. And she went down. Even then, even on the pavement. She turned to Tiana, standing at a corner crying. "Run toward the lights, Tiana," she said. Her voice was clear. "Find someone. Go." Tiana looked at her mother. Then she ran. And you already know where she ended up. Ji Won's private doctor arrived within minutes. Vanessa was stabilized on the street and then moved to a private facility. Clean, quiet, the kind of place that had no logos on anything, and asked no questions. Ji Won took Tiana in his car. "Are you a policeman?" Tiana asked, once they were moving. "No," Ji Won said. "Why do you have so many people?" Silence. "Is my mama going to be okay?" Ji Won looked straight ahead through the windshield at the Seoul night passing by. Then he said, "Yes." Kang Ji Won had not made a promise to anyone in over a decade. His entire existence had been built around the understanding that promises created obligations, and obligations created vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities got people killed. But the word came out before he'd decided to say it, which had never happened to him before in his life. Tiana fell asleep against the car door. Ji Won did not move her. Vanessa woke the next morning in a room that was too quiet and too clean for a hospital, but too well equipped for anywhere else. The light was soft. Someone had placed a chair beside her bed, and on that chair, curled under a blanket with her shoes finally on the correct feet, was Tiana, breathing slow and even and completely at peace. Across the room, seated at a small table with a stack of documents in front of him, was Ji Won. He wasn't watching her. He was working, with the focused quiet of a man who had simply chosen to be in this particular room while he did so. Vanessa sat up on her own. She took inventory of herself. Ribs, shoulder, the cut on her face. Then she looked at Ji Won. "Thank you," she said. "Direct. No performance. No qualification." He acknowledged it with a brief nod and moved on immediately, which she noticed because it was not what most people did with her gratitude. He asked what happened. She said it was a random attack. She held his gaze when she said it. He held hers back. He knew she was lying. She knew he knew. Neither of them said so. He simply said, "Rest. Someone will take you home tomorrow." He began gathering his documents, and Vanessa asked, "Why did you help us?" He was still for a moment. Then he said, "She walked into that room alone. She is a very brave girl." He left. Vanessa looked at her sleeping daughter for a long, long time. The next morning, Ji Won's car brought them home. The gallery looked exactly as she'd left it. The hand-painted sign, the dark window, the door she'd been about to lock when everything came apart. Vanessa carried Tiana upstairs, set her down, and stood in the middle of her own kitchen. She gave herself 2 minutes. This was something she had learned, not from a therapist, not from a book, but from watching her mother absorb blow after blow after blow throughout her entire childhood, without ever taking even 2 minutes to acknowledge what was happening to her. Vanessa had decided early that she would not do that. So she allowed herself 2 minutes to feel what she felt. The fear, the close call, the cold, certain knowledge that David Lee had found her after 4 years of silence. Then she moved. She checked every lock. She closed every blind that faced the street. She sat at her kitchen table and thought through her options. The way she always thought through things, methodically, without panic, from first principles. She could run. She knew exactly how. She had done it once with less than she had now and had built all of this from nothing. She could do it again. She looked around the kitchen. Tiana's drawings covered the refrigerator in overlapping layers. Below the kitchen was the gallery, her work on every wall, 4 years of mornings and late nights and moments of doubt that she had pushed through anyway. She thought about the night she arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases, knowing no one, speaking fragments of a language she was teaching herself from an app. She thought about the first painting she sold, the first review, the first morning she woke up in this city and felt, for the first time in her adult life, like the ground beneath her was her own. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She was staying. Whatever David brought next, she would meet it here, standing, in the life she had chosen. She was not her mother. She was not the woman who had stood in David's kitchen in Busan at 3 a.m, wondering how she had ended up there. She was Vanessa Blake, and she had walked out of that life with nothing but her child and her talent and her nerve. And she was not going to let fear move her again. 3 days later, Kang Ji Won walked into her gallery. He didn't announce himself. He simply appeared during open hours. Vanessa was with a customer. She finished the conversation unhurriedly, because she was not a woman who scrambled, and then she walked over and waited for him to explain himself. He said he wanted to make sure she had recovered. She said she had, in a tone that made clear she had noticed it took him 3 days to check. He looked at the paintings on the walls. Not casually. Seriously. The way a person looks when they are actually seeing something rather than simply observing it. He stood in front of one piece for almost a full minute. Then he asked how long it took. Not what it was called. How long it took. She told him. He nodded once and left. 40 seconds later, Tiana appeared from the back room. "Where did the tall, kind man go?" she asked. Vanessa looked at the door and didn't answer. 4 days later, Ji Won came back. The gallery was closed this time. It was evening, and it was just the 3 of them, Ji Won, Vanessa, and Tiana, who had been asking repeatedly about him. She gave him a tour of the gallery that she had been in approximately 500 times before, explaining each painting with the little knowledge she knew about them. Later in the evening, Tiana fell asleep against his arm. It happened gradually. She was sitting beside him, chatting, then leaning. Then her breathing changed and her weight shifted and she was simply asleep, tucked against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ji Won went completely still. Vanessa glanced over. She saw his expression, carefully, precisely neutral, in a way that was clearly working very hard. She looked back at the art book, before he could catch her, almost smiling. He did not move. For 40 minutes, Kang Ji Won, the man who ran criminal operations across 3 provinces, who had not allowed himself a single unguarded moment in 30 years, sat completely still on a gallery bench with a 4-year-old asleep on his arm, because he did not want to wake her. When Tiana eventually stirred after 15 minutes and opened her eyes, she looked at him the way children look at things they have already decided about, completely unsurprised. "You are still here," she said. "You were sleeping," he said. She accepted this as a complete explanation, slid off the bench, said she was going upstairs to her room, and left politely. That evening, Ji Won and Vanessa stood in front of a new canvas she had hung that afternoon, a large piece, the biggest in the gallery. It showed a woman walking away down a dark road, one hand trailing behind her, and held in that trailing hand was something small and bright. You couldn't quite tell what it was, a light maybe, or a child's hand. Vanessa had painted it that way on purpose. Ji Won looked at it for a long time. Then he asked, not what it was called, not what it meant in the general sense, but one specific, careful question. Why is she not looking back? Vanessa was quiet, debating whether to tell him about her past or not. Then she started talking. Not with tears, not with the halting, fractured cadence of someone confessing, but with the flat, precise voice of a woman who had organized these particular facts in her mind many times over many years, and was choosing, for the first time, to say them out loud to another person. She told him about Busan. She told him about meeting David Lee, the charm, the ease, the abuse, the way he made her feel like the most seen person in any room. She told him about the first signs she explained away, because she was educated and self-aware, and had told herself her whole life that she would recognize this and leave, and she had been wrong about how long recognizing it would take. She told him about the escalation, the gifts after every hit, the way his name in that city closed every official door before she could open it. She told him about her mother, about growing up watching a woman she loved stay in a situation she didn't have the financial footing to leave, and making a silent promise at her father's funeral that she would never be that woman. She told him about finding out she was pregnant, about standing in the bathroom at 2 a.m. looking at a test, and understanding in that moment that the promise she had made to herself was now a promise she had to make to someone else. She packed one bag. She did not say goodbye to anyone. She got on a bus and then a train, and then she kept moving until Seoul, because Seoul was far enough and big enough and full enough of strangers that a woman could disappear into it, if she was careful. She had been careful for 4 years, and then people started looking at her paintings. It started getting recognition, and now David had found her. Ji Won had not moved through any of it. When she stopped speaking, the gallery was very quiet. He looked at the painting for a moment, and then he said, "You built all of this after." Not a question, not admiration exactly, just a recognition. The kind that lands differently than a compliment, because it is simply true. "Yes," Vanessa said. Ji Won looked back at the woman in the painting, walking away, not looking back. He said, "She's not looking back because she already knows what's there." Vanessa looked at the painting like she was seeing something in it she hadn't painted. From the back room, Tiana announced loudly that she was hungry, and the moment closed. But something had been said that could not be unsaid, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said that either. That same evening, on the other side of the city, a man in a hotel suite received a report. David Lee sat in a chair by the window, Seoul spread out beneath him, and read a summary of the last 6 weeks of Vanessa's life. Her gallery, her apartment above it, her sales figures, the reviews of her work, the name of Tiana's school, and, flagged at the bottom of the report, with a specificity that made something in his chest pull tight, the name of the man who had been visiting the gallery 3 times in 2 weeks, the man who had sat in that gallery with Tiana asleep on his arm. David put the report down. He looked out at the city. In his mind, David Lee was not a simple man, and not a simple villain. In his mind, he was the wronged party. He had loved Vanessa. He still loved Vanessa. She had left without a word, without an explanation for 4 years, and a daughter he hadn't known existed, and had been living here, while he had spent 4 years looking for her, and telling himself there was a reason she left that could be fixed. He was not a man who had ever considered that some things could not be fixed. He was not a man who had ever been told no in a way that was permanent. He picked up his phone. The next morning, David Lee walked into Vanessa's gallery carrying flowers. Her favourite, white ranunculus, which she had mentioned exactly once in the 8 months they were together, and which he had remembered the way he remembered everything about her, with a thoroughness that was not romantic but could pass for it. He was immaculate. He was warm. He moved through the gallery during a small opening event, like a man who was simply glad to be there, who had heard about this remarkable gallery from remarkable sources, who was so pleased to find himself here. He spoke to 2 of Vanessa's regulars with genuine charm. He admired the work on the walls with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. And then he found Vanessa. "You always were extraordinary," he said. Vanessa looked at him. She felt it, the old pull of it, not attraction, not any more, but the particular vertigo of standing in front of someone who knew you before you knew yourself. She felt it, she acknowledged it internally, and she set it aside. She thanked him for coming. She accepted the flowers. She told him the gallery was closing soon, and she had to see to her remaining guests. She held the door when he left. He smiled on his way out, the smile of a man who believed that this interaction had gone well, that she was softening, that he was winning something. The moment the last customer was gone, Vanessa put the flowers directly in the bin without looking at them. She locked the door. She went to the back room and sat on the floor next to Tiana, who was on her stomach drawing an elaborate scene involving a dragon and what appeared to be a very small house. She didn't say anything. Tiana narrated her drawing for 20 minutes. Vanessa listened to every word, her mind racing. She did not call Ji Won. Not yet. She wasn't ready to say out loud that she had been right to still be afraid. She did not know that David's next move had already been made. He donated to Tiana's school. A significant donation. New playground equipment. A full set of art supplies for every classroom. A reading corner with beanbags and good lighting. The kind of donation that gets a school principal emotional at a small assembly. The kind that gets a man photographed warmly surrounded by children who have no idea who he is. David was wonderful at the assembly, patient with the children, funny in the specific way that makes small people trust an adult immediately. And among the children at that school was a 4-year-old girl who had her mother's eyes and a tendency to adopt people she had decided on. And David Lee, who had been studying this child from a careful distance for 3 weeks, who knew everything about her that could be known without being known himself, had come prepared. He brought her something small, something her teacher had mentioned in passing that Tiana loved. Tiana was delighted. She told Vanessa about the nice uncle at school who brought her a present. Vanessa asked what he looked like. Tiana described him the way 4-year-olds describe people, in feelings more than features. He was tall. He smiled a lot. He had a watch that was very shiny. Vanessa nodded. She asked what his name was. Tiana said, cheerfully, entirely unaware of what she was detonating, "Uncle David." Vanessa said, "That sounds nice." She asked Tiana what she wanted for dinner. She made dinner. She gave Tiana a bath. She read 2 stories. She turned off the light. She walked out of Tiana's room and sat down at her kitchen table, and did not move for a long time. She connected every dot. The gallery visit, the flowers, the warmth, the smile on the way out, then silence. Then the school, the donation, the carefully constructed goodwill, the patience of it, the discipline of a man who had accepted that the front door was closed and had spent weeks finding a back door, and walking through it slowly enough that nobody noticed. He had gotten to Tiana. He had gotten to Tiana before Vanessa even realized he was close enough to reach her. And he had done it without a single thing she could point to and call threatening. And he had done it because he knew. Because he knew her, in the way that people who have hurt you know you. That the one thing in the world that could move Vanessa Blake was her daughter. She picked up her phone. Ji Won answered on the second ring. Vanessa didn't say hello. She said, "His name is David Lee. He's from Busan. He controls judges, police, politicians." Then she told him everything. Not the condensed version. Not the careful version she had given him in front of the painting. The version edited for dignity and distance. Everything. The full anatomy of what David was and what David controlled and what David was capable of when he decided he wanted something and could not accept that the answer was no. She told Ji Won about the records she had kept from Busan, medical documentation she had filed quietly, photographs, a journal with dates and specifics and details that she had written down because something in her, some survival instinct deeper than conscious thought, had told her she might need them one day. She had carried that documentation through 3 addresses and 4 years, and she had never told anyone it existed. When she finished, Ji Won was quiet for a moment. "Don't take Tiana to school tomorrow," he said. "I already decided that," Vanessa said. "I need everything you have." If you're still watching, drop a comment right now. Tell me, what would you do if the person you ran from found your child? Because what Vanessa does next is what separates her from every other woman in a story like this one. She didn't hide. She didn't pack a bag. She sat at that table and she built a case. Ji Won moved fast. He had spent decades constructing a network of people who knew things that could not be said in public, and he called in obligations that went back years. His team mapped David Lee's infrastructure with the thoroughness of people who understood that their boss did not ask for things twice. Every judge, every politician, every senior police commissioner, every shell company, every arrangement that had ever been made over 15 years of David Lee purchasing his own invincibility. It was extensive, it was documented, and when it was laid out in full, it was the portrait of a man who had methodically bought an entire system and called it success. Ji Won received 2 packages together and understood immediately what they were in combination. Separately, each one was significant. Together, the systemic evidence and Vanessa's testimony, her photographs, her medical records, her 5-year-old journal in her own handwriting, they were complete. They were the full, irrefutable, human portrait of a man who had built his beloved philanthropist image on a foundation of corruption and intimate violence. No ally survives being photographed next to that story. But before the evidence could move, David moved first. Through a judge he had owned for 11 years, he filed for emergency temporary custody of Tiana. The documentation was immaculate, fabricated with the care of someone who had access to people for whom fabrication was a professional service. It described Vanessa as an unstable single mother with a history of erratic behavior. It described Tiana's living situation as precarious. It was designed to look, on the surface, like a concerned father taking reasonable action. Vanessa received the legal notification on a Tuesday morning. She read it once. She set it down. She read it again. And then Vanessa Blake broke. Not because she was weak. She was not weak. She had never been weak. She broke because this specific fear, this one, was the one she had carried since the night she left Busan pregnant and alone on a bus going anywhere else. Not fear of David hurting her. She had survived that. She knew how to survive that. The fear that had lived in her chest for 4 years, quiet and cold and never fully gone, was this, that he would find a way to take Tiana. that she would become her mother, trapped, unable to protect her child from the man who was supposed to love them. She sat at her kitchen table, and she cried. Quietly. Completely. Without performance. Without audience. Without any of the fierce, careful composure she wore everywhere else. She cried for herself at 17, standing at her father's graveside making promises. She cried for her mother. She cried for Tiana, who was currently asleep in the next room with no idea that a man in a nice suit had just tried to take her through a corrupted court system. She cried for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she wiped her face. She stood up. She called Ji Won again. Her voice, when he answered, was steady and cold and absolutely certain. He filed for custody of my daughter. She said, her voice breaking. Ji Won was quiet for one beat. Then he comforted her and made a promise he wasn't going to let that happen. Ji Won requested a meeting with David Lee the next day. David arrived with 2 lawyers and the composure of a man who had walked into negotiations for 20 years and walked out, having gotten what he wanted. He sat down across from Ji Won. Ji Won arrived alone. David read this as weakness. He adjusted his posture slightly, the way people do when they believe they have the upper hand. He smiled. Ji Won opened a folder. He slid it across the table without a word. David looked at it. He turned the first page, then the second. It took approximately 30 seconds for his face to understand what his eyes were reading. His composure didn't shatter. It left him the way water leaves a vessel that has developed a crack. Quietly, steadily, without drama. Ji Won said, 48 hours. Withdraw the filing. Leave Seoul. If you don't, this goes to the international press and 3 separate foreign law enforcement agencies simultaneously. He paused. Your judges cannot help you with that particular calculation. David looked up. The Polish was gone. Underneath it was something Ji Won recognized. The face of a man who has spent so long being untouchable that he has forgotten the feeling of being touched. Who are you to her? David said. Ji Won said, someone you can never be. Well, she is mine. Whoever you may be, I love her, and I will do whatever it takes for her to come back to me, David said, and then he left. His lawyers followed. Ji Won sat alone in the room for a moment. Then he closed the folder. David did not withdraw the filing. He could not locate the version of himself that knew how to accept a permanent no. He had never had to be that version before. Instead, he called the most powerful contact in his network, a National Assembly member who owed him a debt that could not be repaid in money, and he began arranging a counter-move. He would have Ji Won's operations raided and shut down. He would make the cost of helping Vanessa higher than Ji Won was willing to pay. He did not know, could not have known, that the evidence had already left the country. Ji Won had transmitted the full package to 2 international investigative journalists and a foreign law enforcement task force before he ever sat down across from David at that table. The meeting had not been an ultimatum. It had been a courtesy, a final door, held open, which David had chosen not to walk through. The story broke on a Thursday. It broke internationally first, a thorough, meticulously verified investigative piece that named David Lee, mapped his network, documented 15 years of bought outcomes and corrupted institutions, and carried at its centre the testimony of a woman named Vanessa Blake, her photographs, her medical records, her journal, the fabricated custody documentation he had, filed against her. The complete picture of a man who had spent 2 decades constructing a reputation as a beloved philanthropist on top of a foundation built from violence and corruption. David's allies began withdrawing within hours, not because they were surprised, some of them had known, but because they were calculating, the same way they always calculated, and the numbers no longer worked in David Lee's favour. The National Assembly member released a statement of distance by noon. 2 of his judges went unreachable. Busan's business community, which had built a portion of its own image around association with David Lee's philanthropy, began quietly removing his name from websites and donor walls. Korean authorities outside his network opened a formal investigation. Foreign authorities, already briefed, moved through channels that David's remaining contacts could not reach. He was arrested in his hotel room on a Saturday morning. He was dressed beautifully, as he always was, and looked like a man going somewhere important. He said nothing. For the first time in 20 years, there was no one to call, but he muttered to himself that this was not the end. That evening, the gallery was warm and quiet, the city outside doing what Seoul did at night, alive and lit and entirely indifferent to the private dramas of the people moving through it. Ji Won knocked. Vanessa opened the door after checking who it was. Before either of them could say anything, Tiana ran from the back room at full speed, the particular velocity of a small child who has heard a sound they associate with something good, and reached Ji Won and stopped. She looked up at him with the complete, uncomplicated certainty of someone who had already decided how this worked. "You came back," she said. Ji Won looked down at her, something in his face that he had stopped bothering to compose when it was just the 3 of them. "I said I would," he said. Tiana grabbed 2 of his fingers and pulled him inside, already talking about something she had made today that he needed to see immediately, right now. It was very important. Ji Won let himself be led. Vanessa watched from the doorway. He glanced back at her over Tiana's head. Something passed between them. Not said, not declared. Nothing named or promised. Just the look of 2 people who have been through something together, and come out the other side, and are standing in the same warm room, which is not nothing. Which is, in fact, quite a lot. Later, when Tiana was asleep and the gallery was quiet, they stood in front of the painting. The woman walking away down the dark road, hand trailing, holding the small bright thing that might be a light or might be a child's hand. Ji Won said, "What happens to her next?" Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "She stops walking," she said. "She found where she was going." Ji Won looked at the painting for a long time. He said nothing, but he stayed. The next morning came in through the gallery windows, slow and golden, the kind of light that made even ordinary things look like they'd been considered. Vanessa was at her canvas, a new painting, just begun, the first strokes of something that had no fear in it. In her corner by the window, Tiana was on her stomach with her crayons, narrating an elaborate story about a princess who lived in an art museum and had a very tall friend who was learning to draw. David Lee faced trial in 3 countries. His network, built carefully, purchased expensively, maintained over 2 decades, came apart in 72 hours. Because the one thing he had never accounted for, in all his calculations, in all his planning, in all the years he had spent making himself untouchable, was a woman who had been quietly keeping receipts since the night she decided to stop being afraid of him. Kang Ji Won returned to his empire. His men noticed in the weeks that followed that he smiled slightly more than he used to. None of them mentioned it. He told himself that Vanessa Blake was a resolved situation, a closed file, a problem that had been handled. He told himself this with less conviction each time, and eventually he stopped telling himself anything at all, and simply drove to the gallery on a Thursday evening. Vanessa Blake hung a new painting that spring. People stood in front of it longer than they usually stand in front of anything. When they asked what it was called, she told them. She called it "The Morning After, the Last Time I Ran." If this story moved you even a little, do me one favour. Like this video right now. Drop a comment telling me exactly what part hit you the hardest. And subscribe if you want more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. There are so many more coming. Thank you, genuinely, for staying with this story until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.